Here. Good. All right, so good afternoon again, everybody, and I'm really happy to see y'all. Very nice to have the group together today. I am particularly excited about the chapter of Judy Klitzner's book and the two stories that we're going to look at because they're sort of neglected stories. Because I think they're very short and they come next to really big popular biblical stories. They get a little bit lost in the shuffle. And I think it's really worth spending a little time with each of them and seeing the connection between them, because it breathes a life into these relatively obscure stories that is really kind of interesting, exciting to me. The two stories that we're talking about are the story of Babel, the Tower of Babel, usually. And the second story is in Exodus, the story of the two midwives who Pharaoh tells to kill all of the male Israelites, and they do not do that. They spare their lives, right? Klitzner's claim is, as all of her chapters will do, that the second story subverts the first, and that there is something about the first that is clarified or articulated differently or better by the second story. So something about those midwives and their actions and the way that story is told is going to tell us, is going to share a message with the story of the Tower and City of Babel. And we're going to see how those stories relate to each other and mine the same resources biblically by looking primarily at their language and at the things and themes they discuss and don't discuss. Very classical literary analysis with a little bit of traditional commentaries thrown in. All right, cool. Any questions up to there about what we're going to do? First, you tell them what you're going to do.
Then you do it.
Then you do it, and then you tell them what you did. So yeah, so let's go to it, and make sure I have the right Safari. Open here. Oh, there we go. Let me let a couple people in here too. All right, you see that? Let me get my sheet up here. Good. Everybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So the story of in Hebrew, the word is Bavel. Not Babel, Bavel. There's a hard B and a soft V, Bavel. So I'll use those interchangeably, Babel and Bavel. If I ever use like a Hebrew or jargony expression and you don't know what I'm talking about, be it a name or another word, stop me. Right, I'm used to these words, so I use them often. But if there's a word I use that you don't understand it, stop me and let me know, and I'll explain. Okay. Klitzner points out a couple things right away in this, and I'm going to refer to her a couple of times specifically. She says these stories, the Babel and the Egypt narrative, center on and share a few thematic things. First of all, they both center on the building of cities. Pharaoh is building cities, and the people of Babel want to build a city. They both specify and use the same building materials, which, by the way, are only mentioned in these two stories. So, right, that's what I said too. I was like, that is really unless you have the sensitivity to the text, you wouldn't notice that. But that both of them feature these very this very specific kind of narrative, which we'll look at. This very specific fear-inducing. Do this or else. This sort of or else language, which is also very unique, and both display an unusual emphasis on the presence or absence of names. Names are crucial. Okay, so the first story we're going to look at is Bavel. And I'm going to go back and forth between the Hebrew and the English because let's just read through it all the way through once in English. Okay, I'm going to just read straight through it once. So we got the story in our head. And then I'm going to go back a little bit and go back and forth because it's unbelievably simplistic storytelling. It's repetitive and almost childlike. Everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. Doesn't that sound like a kid's story? Once upon a time, right?
Yes.
And as they migrated from the east, remember, this is after the flood has ended. Noah and his family have come out of the ark, and they are beginning to repopulate the world and move across the face of the earth from that one singular place where they landed. They came upon a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them hard." And bricks served them as stone, and bitumen served them as mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the sky, to make a name for ourselves, else we be scattered all over the world." The Lord came down to look at the city and tower that man had built. And the Lord said, "If as one people with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. Let us go down and confound their speech there, so that they shall not understand one another's speech." Thus the Lord scattered them from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it is called Bavel, because there the Lord confounded their balal, their speech, the speech of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. That's it. That's the whole story. What's missing from this story? First of all, a remarkable thing. This is a story without any names. Nobody is named. Who are these people? Noah, his children, they're named. Anybody who has a speaking part, right? We know them. It's kind of remarkable. Nobody is named here. Also, I didn't do this tally, but just stylistically, there's tremendous redundancy here. So, for example, Klitzner points out the phrase kol haaretz, which you see is here in the first verse, the whole earth, kol haaretz, appears 5 times in 9 verses. The word safa, meaning language, appears 5 times. The word to build, bana, 3 times. The word for city, ir, 3 times. Nafotz, lafutz, the verb to spread out, 3 times. The word shem appears twice and is the same construction as the word sham, which means there, which appears 5 times for a total of 7. And the word echad or achat, feminine or masculine for the word one, appears 4 different times. That's it. That's practically all the words in this story. And it's just a handful of words. It reads like they're trying, like those challenges to write a story using only so many words. And what you get is this very Dr. Seuss kind of sing-songy rhythm. The dum da da dum da da dum 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 da da dum da da dum. It reads very rhythmically and rhymey, even though it's not a poem. For example, I'm going to give you an example here in verse 3. Hava nilbana levenim benisrafa lesrefa. All those words sound the same. I could be saying sing-songy stuff. Lingalang da ding da dong, right? It sounds right. Hava nilvana nivenim. Venisrafa lesrefa. It sounds like the Lorax. And that's on purpose. It's on purpose. Because the next story and the previous stories use lots of different words, all kinds of flowery languages. There's names in the stories before, there's names in the story afterwards. It's not an indictment of biblical, a limitation of biblical literature. Kol haaretz safa echad. Maybe you didn't think about this. This is sort of one of those things you don't think about in the Noah story. But if Noah and his family get off of the ark and they're the only people on earth, well, how is it that there are different languages? How did different languages ever happen? There's only 9 people in the world and they all speak the same language. So you would assume they would teach their children that language and their children would teach their children. There should only be one language. And sure enough, in one of the next stories, there is only one language. There's unusual phrasing here. Things like the word hava. Hava. You know the song, right? Hava Nagila, right? What does that mean? Hava is the fancy word for it is jussive. It's the jussive case for those of you who are linguists. What it means is it's suggestive. Come, let us. Hey, let's go, right? That kind of sense. Hava, come, let us do this. Hey, everybody, everyone with me. Hava Nagila, come, let us celebrate. Right? Everyone join in. Hava nivne lanu ir. See, twice. Hava, let's make bricks. And I have to stop there for a second because you know me already. I'm fascinated by objects.
They know how to make bricks.
Right. Bricks are a very important object. Maybe you think of them as pedestrian and ordinary things, but bricks are man-made stone. And that is a big leap in technology. You don't have to mine stones anymore and figure out how to build a wall with them. Now you can make them. And you can make them
the same size.
Whatever you want.
Uniform. Right. You can make them whatever. You can literally shape them in your image and you can make them uniform. Identical stones. There's a sub-narrative here of city building. In addition to all the other things that are going on here, this is the beginning of the gathering of rural and pastoral and wandering people into settled people living in one place in artificially constructed buildings. That's a big leap. And it comes with problems. We assume that the Migdal is the tower because we sort of grew up with songs about the Tower of Babel, right? And all of that kind of stuff. But really they say, come, let us build a city. It's not just the Tower of Babel, it's the city of Babel. And we will see that God comes down to look at the city, right? That we don't know what it is, but something about this city offends God. And there's all kinds of deliberation about what exactly did they do? What is their sin?
Right.
And the story doesn't say. It just says, Hava nivne lanu, come, let us build for ourselves Ir, a city, umigdal, and a tower, urosho bashamayim. And then, B'na'aseh lanu shem, and we'll make for ourselves a name. This tower and this city are going to name them. The nameless are going to finally get a name. And he says, pen nafot, there's the lestwy, there's the emergency statement. Let's build this city, otherwise we'll be scattered all over the world. Hang on one second. Hang on one second, everybody. Yes. The installer is done.
Oh,
So I'm going to ask you all to hold on for a couple seconds while I sign out, and I'll be back just in a couple seconds. Discuss. Feel free to discuss amongst yourselves.
I don't understand how those people knew that there was an extension of where they were, that wasn't the whole earth. So why would they fear being scattered?
They were smarter than the people in Columbus time. They knew there wasn't a flat earth.
They didn't know any more earth than what they were on.
Well, I want to know, why did God let them know how to build bricks? If he didn't want them using bricks to build cities and a tower that would make their group in higher place than
I had always heard that the sin was trying to reach God through the big tower.
Yes, that's the interpretation I've heard as well.
Right.
but that's not what
doesn't
the
say
line
so.
today
It just-
says.
That's not what she says.
I always liked it when Rabbi Culpepper was the first person to ask me this. She said, "What is this bitumen stuff? What is it?"
And what is it?
It's tar.
It's tar, yeah.
Natural tar from decayed plant material. But I thought it was very interesting that that's what she was focused on. That where did this stuff come from? What is it? I want to know why God, he or she, let them know how to make bricks in the first place if he didn't like what they did with them.
Right. It raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, except that God's been letting people, all through this do things that she disapproves of. So I mean, it's not like a puppet master making.
You're right, Margaret. But my question there would be one of timing. I don't know how soon after the change of heart he had with Noah's Ark. I don't know how soon after that this is occurring. Can you give me some interest?
It's soon.
Oh,
Right.
So maybe they didn't have generations of separation. And, that would kind of talk about the language issue.
Well, so a couple of things. The very end of chapter 10 is these are the lines of Shem, the descendants of name, Shem. Interesting. yeah, I mean, that's the previous chapter. And then it's almost an entire chapter of nothing but descendants and people's names, and the fact that each of them had their own languages and their own lands. And then it says everyone on it completely departs from that listing of genealogy, which again is like 100% names. Like this whole page is people's names who are the descendant of somebody whose name means name. And who we are told there's many different languages, clans and languages, and diversity of people. And then there is this push to bring people together and make all live in one place. They wandered and they find a place there, and settle there. And in terms of their rebelliousness, that's going to come up, right? Why does God let them do this? Let them behave in this way? That's going to be where she goes in her analysis. All right, so let's look at that. Somehow, all of this contributes to the picture is God doesn't like everybody coming together. This coming together and building up vertically and horizontally, Ir umigdal, that sort of indicates two different directions. That God does not like. And he says, Vayomer Adonai. If they can do this, if they can build this tower up to the heavens, up to the sky, then they will have no whatsoever.
No,
Names are not the only thing that are missing. God is missing too. They say we will build for ourselves.
Yes.
They're taking all the credit for everything.
Right. They are, something they're doing is angering God. And you're right, it's that. What they are doing, they're building for themselves to make a name, to all have one language, to be in one place, to settle. And God sees that as threatening. He even says, Hava, and lest, come, let us go down. I mean, who he's talking to is another question. And let's confound their language. Nivala sham sfatam. Again, the word that looks like Shem but means there. Their languages. Asher lo yishma'u ish sfat re'ehu. So that one person will not understand their neighbor's speech. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? Like, don't we want good communication? Don't we want people to speak the same? But this notion of a single place that determines is very, very difficult. And God comes down and he does exactly that. Vayafetz, they are worried, pen nafot, everything they're worried about, all of the things that they are aspiring to and worrying about, they want to come together, pen nafot, lest we be separated, vayafetz, God sends them out. There's an equal and opposite reaction in the language. They want one language, God confuses their language. They want to build a city, God destroys the city. They want to live in one place, God sends them to many places. Every aspect of what they want to do, God does not accept. Therefore, and by the way, this is interesting. How does the story end? It ends with an act of naming. And Klitzner points out that names have this incredibly potent ability in the Bible. Everything important that gets named, and naming things is how you actually know something, how you exercise intimate knowledge of it. So God names the place confusion, muddled, because it was there that they tried to have one language, and it's from there that he sent them out over the whole earth. Yeah, Marcia.
I think God made a huge mistake there, because wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody in the world spoke one language? I think there'd be peace, much more peace and less strife in the world if we were all speaking one language. So can't God make mistakes?
Well, I'm sure you know about Esperanto and how remarkably unsuccessful it has been. And I'm curious. Let's take a quick straw poll, right? How many agree with Marcia that one language universally in the world would make for more peace?
Nobody.
No, there's a few. There's 1, 2, 3. And how many don't think so? All right, so it's a little more on the don't think so than on the do think so side. We're going to get into that much.
So look at the United States. Everybody speaks more or less speaks the same language, and we still manage to have a lot of strife.
Yes, that's true. I do think like we have an interesting situation in the United States, because a case could be made for English first, right? It's associated with very unsavory parts of our community, and also with some unsavory history. But it's not. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. And our ancestors, Jewish ancestors, learned English, and because they learned English, they became American, and successfully American. I mean, there were other things. I'm not trying to whitewash any of that, but I am saying you could make a good case for how language is a unifier and a door opener, and a universal language. Teaching kids who are immigrants languages earlier is more empowering than helping them to keep their own culture, which may actually affect their ability to assimilate. In this case, assimilating being a good thing. Okay, and that's not the discussion I want to have, but it's worthwhile. But it does relate to this. It relates to this because we're inclined to see unity as good, and to see like to Marcia's point, what's so bad about everybody communicating and understanding each other? So let's go into it with that question here. I want to look at something. Okay, here's Rashi. Rashi is a medieval, 11th century scholar who comments on not every verse of the Hebrew Bible, but almost. He has a running commentary. He's not unique, but he's relatively unique amongst commentators that he has a comprehensive running commentary on the Tanakh. And he says, Safa echat. Remember, that's the whole earth, Kol haaretz Safa echat, was one language. And he says, interestingly enough, citing the Midrash in Tanchuma, it was Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh. What was the language which everyone spoke? They spoke, of course, Hebrew. Noah spoke Hebrew, presumably. God speaks to Noah in Hebrew. So, okay. And one speech. Here's the thing. It's not the one language, it's Dvarim Achadim, and same words. They came with one plan, saying, in other words, a unified speech. God has no right to select the heavenly realms exclusively for God's self. Let us ascend to the sky and make war on God.
Mm.
In other words, hey, everybody, who the hell does he think he is? He can't own the sky. We're going to build a tower, Birosho Bashamayim, whose top is in the skies. And according to the Midrash here, it's an act of aggression, not to wave and say, hey, hi, God, how you doing? Nice to see you, right? It's an act of aggression. Dvarim achadim means they had a united mind. They had like language. They all fell into step. Another explanation of Dvarim Achadim, because it's a kind of weird thing. It's hard to know what that phrase really means. And this is sort of the offensive thing they do. It means, this is what Dvarim Chadim, sharp, aggressive words. This is what they said. Once every 1,656 years, which, by the way, if you add up all the years in the previous genealogy that we said was in chapter 10, you get that long. That's the period that elapses from the creation to the flood. So they say once every 1,600 years, God shakes the heavens like the flood. And we're coming up on the second one. He said, so come, let us build this tower and make supports for the heaven. We're going to, shortcut around God's plan. We know what he's going to do. It's coming. So why now do they settle here? They settle here now in order to prevent God from doing what they fear God is going to do again. In other words, to unify against God. And here's what their act of unity is a act of uniformity and of lockstep purpose. Now, here's a scholar named the Netziv, who wrote a book called Ha'emek Davar. He says this on Rosho Bashamayim. Its top in the skies. It is obvious that you should not think that this would be one city in the whole world. Rather, they thought that the other nearby cities would be subjects of their city, that they had the tower, and that they would be able to see from a distance from that tower all over all of the settlement, so that no one will be able to separate themselves and go to another land. That's why they needed its top to reach the sky. Oh, now that's an interesting thing. Theme for the day is Dr. Seuss. You know, Yertle the turtle, right? He wants to be very, very high up so that he can see everything in order to exercise hegemony over it. Yertle is an authoritarian. He sees himself as superior to others, superior to the workers below him. And if he goes, anything he can see belongs to him, and you can't get away. There's, right, cities hold people in as well as keeping people out. Oh, now see, between Rashi and the Netziv, we have this idea of the story, that the problem with this story is uniformity of thought and language, and what that ends up leading to. And here's what the Netziv continues to say. This is sort of really important. And we will make a name for ourselves. People were set up to watch and be in charge of things, and they were army chiefs in charge of punishing those who would cross. And since if this is not the case, there would be no need for the tower. Why would you need this tower? All of that is due to fear and suspicion of others, lest we be scattered. They feared someone might leave to another land. We can't let people leave. This was related to the uniformity that was amongst them. And by the way, the uniformity of the bricks. They feared that people might abandon this philosophy and adopt another. Because what happens when you let people go to another place and learn another language? They start to think, oh, hey, in that next town, they do it differently. How about that? Wow, I went to Europe and my eyes were open. Therefore, they sought to ensure that no one would leave their society, and one who veered from uniformity among them was judged. And the same words can also be seen as the fact that they would kill whoever they did not like, and et cetera, et cetera. It's the diminishment of the individual. God made us to give us names, to be individuals, actually to rebel against God and to leave the Garden of Eden. I mean, that's the whole purpose of that story. And here they want to uproot that. They want to all stay in one place, keep everybody in. No diversity, no individuality, no names. Uniformity of size, shape, and color. And this is the last Midrash we're going to share on this. In this Midrash, it's called the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliazer. It's a famous Midrash about Bavel, why it was so bad. There were no stones there. And so what did they do? They baked bricks, burned them like the builder until it was built. And it had ascents on the east and the west. And the laborers who took up the bricks, who carried the bricks up, went up on one side, and those who descended came down on the other side for efficiency. And if a man fell and died carrying bricks to the top of the tower, they paid no heed to him. They didn't care. What's one more person? Right? It's like ants. You go up one side and down another side, carry a brick up, carry a brick down, all like ants, all identical, all part of the big machine. But if a brick fell, they sat down and wept over it because they had lost, something of value and money. Now they'd have to get another one.
So that sounds a lot like building the pyramids.
Doesn't it though? It sure does. By the way, just Klitzner points this out. The very next thing after the story of Babel is God tells Avram to leave the place where he is settled and everything he has ever known and all familiar ideas. Your land, your native land, your father's house, everything about you, your place of birth. Go away from what is familiar and common language and go far, far away. And I'm not even telling you where. It's interesting. Not hava, come, but lech, go. All right, any questions up to there? Comments? Fascinating, right? I mean, have you ever thought about the Tower of Babel story before like that? No, it's an assault on individualism.
I feel like we're going through that a little bit in the United States politically right now.
Yeah. Yeah, say more about that, Ella.
Well, I mean, we have one group of people in Congress who say, they're all going to vote alike no matter what they think.
Yeah. Tribalism, unity of thought is a major crisis in our country. The inability of people to separate themselves out from the language of groupthink is a pervasive problem. And it's linked to dehumanization of the other, which we also see in both this story, dehumanization of the individual. There's no names. These are nameless people. I mean, it couldn't be less individual. And the uniformity of it all. Everyone's the same. All those fill in the group blank, right? They're all the same, right? That kind of thought of identifying a whole group of people as indistinguishable from one another, both in terms of how they look, which we do. That's like one of our worst bad habits, and in terms of thought. All those Jews think the same. Yeah, that kind of thing. So I think you're right, Ella. I think that this story is very timely. And by the way, there is more than ever in human history, and in America, the intense urbanization of America, the loss of locality. You get off the highway anywhere, and everything looks the same everywhere. It's all the same language. It's all the same stores. It's all the same image. Newark is no different than Nebraska. You got to really go off the path and away from cities to start to see diversity. Cultural shallowness, the intense shallowness of most people's cultural depth, and that it really only goes to the things that everybody knows about. Football and celebrities, and a very narrow piece of the thought spectrum, the intense thought spectrum. Even in politics, you're either a capitalist or a communist, right? I mean, the collapsing of ideas into simplistic language is unbelievably harmful.
It seems like most of the surveys that come across my computer are yes or no. Do you think this or that? There's no gray.
Right. It's all the same color.
This is really fascinating because I've been in reading the Torah year after year. It's just been striking, the bareness of this story and this description. So it's really exciting to hear the kind of richness that can be read into it.
Klitzner cites a couple of Jewish scholars like Maimonides and Erich Fromm, and she says, this is from Maimonides, that we are honored because of our defiance and individuality. That's the story of the Garden of Eden. Maimonides says, the human being has become as one of us. That's what God was worried about, right? And they're going to be like us, they'll be unstoppable. And no other species resembles it in that way, that in our wisdom and understanding to know good and evil and to choose. And Erich Fromm says, acting against God's orders means freeing from coercion, emerging the unconscious existence of pre-human life to the level of human. That an individual, even a rebellious one, is more godly than a mindless member of a human herd. That's Klitzner. I love that. I highlighted it. That's humanity. And that's what God's worried about here, is the loss of the individual and the ultimate worth and the indescribable language required to describe a single human being who has never, ever, ever been copied like a brick can be copied. No two humans are the same. We are, in fact, the exact opposite of bricks. We cannot be manufactured or made to look the same. Even identical twins aren't identical. Okay, let's look at our next story. Also short and not quite as complex in terms of the stuff that we don't know. Klitzner points out that this story too begins with a lot of names, just like we had a long list of names that preceded the Tower of Babel story. The story of the midwives is preceded by Ele Shemot. These are the names. It's the beginning of the book of names, and it begins with the names of only 12 of the 70. Genesis ends with a listing of 70 people who came down to Egypt. It actually lists like all of their names in more detail, but this one narrows it just to the children of Israel, the tribes. Joseph being already in Egypt, Joseph died and all his generation. But, and here too, just as the previous story followed the new fertility of Noah and his family after the ark, where they're told to peru uruvu, to be fruitful and multiply. Here too, paru vayishritzu vayirbu, they peru uruvu. That language of fruitfulness and multiplying. Although it does add this one word here. Oop, nah. All right, sorry. That they vayishritzu, and they crept. It's actually the word that describes the movement of creepy crawlies, bugs. And that's part of the our hint. It's a hint to us because the text adds a word to this two-word phrase that's already been used twice before, importantly, to indicate a large expansion of population. One with Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply, spread out over the earth. One following Noah and his family, be fruitful and multiply and repopulate the earth. And here, where we go down into Egypt, we are fruitful and we multiply. And many, 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 right? And we fill the earth. Be ma'od, ma'od, right? And we grew, we multiplied greatly. Ma'od, ma'od, very much so that the land was filled with us. And now, by the way, names are going to disappear. Now we don't have names, and we're just the children of Israel. A new king arose in Egypt who did not know Joseph. Did he really not know Joseph? That seems unusual. Joseph is like the second most famous person in Egyptian politics. He's literally the right-hand man of Pharaoh. It's like being an American and you've never heard of the vice president. Well, like I would be running, I'm the next president, and I'd be like, Mike Pence, never heard of him. Who's that guy? I mean, like, really, you never heard of him? Or does it mean that he sort of intentionally erased Joseph? Right? Like, no, I don't know him. I want nothing to do with him. Right? Either way, in practice, the children of Israel's special treatment or connection to the Pharaoh through Joseph is over. He either literally doesn't know him, which would be really weird, meaning he is an invader or an unusual ascender to the throne or something like that, a revolutionary, or he was the next in line and he just wants nothing to do with it. And he says to his people, El Amo, Hine Am B'nai Israel, that nation. He says to his nation something about that nation. This, by the way, is the first appearance of Israel as a nation. Pharaoh creates the Jewish people, the Israelite people. Before this, we were just children of Israel. We were a family, a clan, a large family. He intentionally others us in this sentence. He says to his nation, there's that nation over there. They are Rav ve'atzum mimenu. They are more than us. Or it could also be read as, they have taken a lot from us. One or the other. Either way, it's bad. And it's the same kind of thing that every tyrant in every corner of the world has ever said about people who he wants to blame things on. He hurls accusations at them. A few of them will stick to a few different people. And he says, they are not us, they are not human, and they are taking what we have. Hava. There's that Hava pen Come, let us, lest, or else. Hava nitchak malo. Let us deal wisely with it. By the way, it's the singular, with it. That people, them. Let us deal wisely with those people. That's how we'd say it in English. Pen your bet, lest they become too big for us, and someone starts a war with us, and they will join our enemies and do battle with us. Okay. So you know this part from the Passover Haggadah. They set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built arei miskenot lefaro. They built cities to oppress them. Pitom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, those virile Jews, they're like animals. The more you oppress them, the more they grow, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to fear them, dread them. And the Egyptians ruthlessly, now they got even harsher on them and imposed greater on them, ruthlessly made their lives bitter, bachomer uvilvenim, with mortar, here mortar comes first, and bricks. Again, this is the only two places in the whole of scripture where those words appear together. In one of them, it's levenim and chomer, but in this one, it's a little reversed. It's chomer levenim, maybe a hint. And they imposed all sorts of things on them. All right, now we get to the midwives. The king of Egypt said to the miyaldot ha'ivriot. Miyaldot, a miyaledet is a midwife, a birthing coach, a person who helps someone give birth. And ivri is what Abraham was. He's an ivri, a over, a person who moves or transgresses or goes or crosses over or something. It means, and it's not clear here whether these are actually Hebrews, because if they are, why is Pharaoh talking to them? And why would Pharaoh ever think that Hebrews would kill their own people's children? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And yet it seems like they are actually Hebrews. But if they are Egyptians, we're going to see that they fear God. So let's see. He says to the Ivriot, and then we are told specifically, these are the first two names that appear here after the names have disappeared. And we are told the word name appears twice. We're said the name of one of them was Shifra, and the name of the other was Pu'ah, which by the way are very general word names. They are names, but they mean young and beautiful. Right? Shifra means beautiful, and Pu'ah means young. It means, the cutie and the youngster, kind of, that sort of thing. And yet those are their names. And he says to them, when you birth the Israelite children, look at the birth stool. Just like in the first story, all the things that he asks them to do, they are going to not do. Just like all the things that the Bavel people wanted to do, God specifically overturned those things. He wants them to look. Why do they have to look at the birth stool?
See if it's a boy or girl.
That's right, to see if it's a boy or a girl. They didn't have ultrasonic. You couldn't know before. The only way to know whether something was a boy or a girl was to wait until it was born and then look. And if it is a boy, kill him. And if it is a girl, let it live. Why? Why boys only? Yeah, Barbara.
Well, to answer your question, maybe because of the military idea for the fighting. But I question the king's knowledge of biology, because it seems to me that if you let one boy live, they can impregnate a whole bunch of girls. They should have killed off, or he should have suggested killing off the girl babies.
Yes. Hang on, I'm losing my battery. Let me plug in here. There's a little
Bad idea, Barbara.
I'm not a biologist. I don't know, but I know I was
We can
told.
reverse that.
and I'm pretty sure that that Barbara is not actually suggesting, killing all the girls, but that would be better. But he doesn't seem to understand. Also, all the men are the ones who are doing the labor. So you're going to kill the men who are your laborers because you're worried that the laborers are going to rise up against you. Well, okay, then you won't have any laborers.
I don't care.
So it's that doesn't make any sense. And like you said, it turns out actually, Barbara, that girls become the actual problem for Pharaoh. It's a girl who saves Moses. It's a girl who puts him in a basket. It's a girl who nurses him to adulthood. It's a girl who takes him to meet Jethro in the desert. I mean, Moses's life is guided along by, if you'd have killed those girls, Moses would have been, nobody.
Mhm.
So the daughter of Pharaoh is the one who saved, right? It's ironic, and I'm sure it's on purpose. Yeah, okay. The midwives, however, he said, Uri'iten, look at the stool, vatir ena, but they feared God. They feared God, velo asu, and they did not do as the king told them, and they let boys live. So the king summons them. I mean, he must have found out about this because there's boys around. So how did that happen? He summons them, and he says to them, Madua asiten, why did you do this? Letting the boys live. Now, this is I know I say this about a lot of passages, but this is one of my favorite pieces of the Bible, is their answer. And it's brilliant. Vatomarna hamiyaldot el Pharaoh. Those Hebrew women are not like normal women. They're chayot, they're animals. And before a midwife can even get there, they've given birth. Love that. Lo kenashima mitzriyot. They're not like us Egyptian women. This makes me think they're Egyptians. Pharaoh, what can I tell you? They're not like us Egyptian women, all delicate and nice. They're animals. See, the translation here, vigorous, you could, but the word is chayot. They're animals. And I think it ties in with the othering of the Israelites here and the lack of individualization. These are not these are like cows. They just drop the kid out in the field before he can even get there. Now, what's she do? If they're Egyptian and they're saying this to Pharaoh, but they're actually disobeying Pharaoh's orders. So this is a little ruse. They're like the Underground Railroad, right? They're an Egyptian woman. You can't say, well, Pharaoh, it's wrong for you to do that, because then he'll kill you. So you feed Pharaoh's racist ideology. Pharaoh is worried that we're going to spread like vermin. Vayishritzu. They're going to overrun us. And so these midwives are playing into his racial stereotypes. Yeah, you're right, Pharaoh. They're animals. We can't help it. What are we going to do? And in the meantime, they're saving kids' lives over on the side while they're feeding Pharaoh what he needs to know. And he buys it. And interestingly enough, we're told specifically about their reward. God deals kindly with these midwives. And because they feared God, he makes for them batim. Whatever, I don't know what that means, like whether that's, a lineage, a legacy, or actual house, like God builds them. homes, like legacy clan homes. They're remarkable people. And their rebellion is that they're named and they save individual people and they undermine Pharaoh's lack of individualization. And in this case, God doesn't have to come down and save the day from the imposition of uniformity. People do it. Regular old normal people. Humble little servants who you never even heard of. The cute one and the young one. Right? They revolutionize and change history in that. And what happens, of course, is Pharaoh charged that every boy should be thrown into the Nile and let every girl live. But their example, and this makes us Israelites. Israelite women know what these women did, and they start to hide children. They become revolutionaries who lead others in revolution, sisters who lead a sisterhood of revolutionaries. And this Levite woman, and the woman who conceived and bore a son, and the woman who puts in this wicker basket, also with chemer, with bitumen. Mm-hmm. And the sister who stationed herself down to make sure nothing happened, and Pharaoh's daughter, who is just called Paro. She does not have a name. But the very last thing in this episode is when the child grew up, she brought the child. Well, first of all, this is also interesting to me. The word for nursing. She says, take this child and nurse it for me. Oh no, she wants to find how many times the word for nursing is repeated. Fetch me isha me'aneket min ha'ivriot. Me'aneket, a nursing. Vatinek. And she nursed her. Vehini kuhu. And again, vatini kuhu. 4 times in like 3 verses, the root for nursing is said. And when he's grown up, Vatikra Shemo Moshe. She gives him a name, and a name with meaning, because I drew him out of the water. Individuality and names and uniqueness are God's plan. And those who seek uniformity and a lack of a monochromatic life may have noble or ignoble intentions, but they are operating against the design of God, which is that we spread out, that we diversify, and that we have a diversity of languages, which results in a diversity of thought, and that we not be in lockstep of our thinking. The greatest tribute to God and the closest way to become close to God is not by building a tower, it's by becoming an individual. Klitzner quotes Buber. He says, only an I can approach God as a thou, if you know Buber's teaching. The only way to have a close connection with God is to be a true individual person. To know yourself. Unique. The Hebrew midwives redeem uniqueness and individuality and place it firmly in the hands of us. God created us unique, and our responsibility is to resist the tyranny of uniformity. Yes, responses, reactions, comments, questions, applications to contemporary life.
It's good to be an I, but not alone.
Yes, right. That's right. That And really, I think it's very hard to be an I not in community. I think you do have to spend time alone to get to know yourself. I think that is actually undervalued. Alone time. And I don't mean like, time out, bad time for kids. I mean just time with yourself and your own thoughts, bored and just alone with yourself. I think that's really important, and people don't do enough of it. A lot of people don't do enough of it. Be comfortable with who you are. But I also think we're mirror people, right?
We have to bounce off each other.
Right. We become who we are because of how we interact. And that actually, I think it changes us on a very fundamental level to interact. And that's how we become. It's through play. It's like the value of play. Sometimes you have to play with others to learn who you are and what your limits are. How far can I go? What do I want? As distinct from others. And so that idea that you could be coerced, right? Both of these are stories of coercion, that you could be coerced by your community is wrong. And that the point of community is not to create uniformity, it's to create a secure place for people to become something unique, a place for people to thrive and flourish as individuals.
Like our class.
Well, look, it challenges a lot of religion. Does seem on its surface to be a lot about uniformity. Like everybody's got to practice the same way. It's sort of an insult to say everybody keeps Shabbos their own way. That implies a kind of lawlessness. And, and it seems from if you look at religious people from the outside, you think they all just lockstep together. Look, they all look and move and pray, and they all say the same things, and they eat the same way and do the same things and dress the same way. And sort of the more religious you are, the more uniformity that's true. And I take that as a concern. I think like how to balance our need for togetherness and community and people who do think like us, because we do need that, with the pitfalls of mindlessness and uniformity. That's sort of the balance, I think, for me. How to be part of a group without being tribalistic. How to have a support and family network that gives you meaning and context and community and support without thinking mine are better than those, right? I mean, that's the stuff, right? That's the effort here. You know the name Yitz Greenberg?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great teacher, Jewish scholar, a longtime close personal and family friend. I grew up in different cities with his children. Our parents knew each other, and we went to a lot of Jewish things and ran around in the hallways of a lot of hotels when our parents were doing Jewish stuff, and we were running around as little kids. But Yitz used to say, I don't care what denomination you are, so long as you're embarrassed by it. Right? That, like, we all need to be part of a thing. Like, none of us are actually captain of our own ship. We might like to think we are, but I fall within the parameters of a group. And that's fine, so long as I also recognize, like, my group is not really better than theirs. It's just mine. Like, I got things in my group that I'm embarrassed about. It's easy to point out, well, the Reform Jews do it that way, right? Like, no, says Yitz, that's not it. You should look for things you admire about the other guy and look for things that you are critical of in your own house. That's actually the religious way. But I fear Yitz is kind of a lone voice. Yeah. He's been excommunicated from a couple of communities.
Oh, but Klau was successful under his.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, he's in our analogy, he is the Mialdot HaIvriot. He's the midwives who mustered courage, the courage of isolation and of excommunication, he lost a lot of his the community he grew up with, because he was willing to say, we're not the who have the truth. That got him in a lot of trouble. And he had to be lonely in some ways for it. Lost some of the community that was important to him because it demanded a measure of uniformity and of uniform thinking that was actually being very, in his mind and my mind too, very destructive and corrosive to Jewish klal, to Jewish unity and of purpose. It wasn't to be uniformity. It was to have unity amongst the diversity that klal was all about. And that got him in a lot of hot water, actually, I think. Though he discovered also there are a lot of other people who want that.
The times that I had a chance to hear someone from Kalal speak, I always thought it was very clever that if they were speaking to a conservative group, the person wasn't conservative. The person was Orthodox or Reform, which kind of goes back to Marcia's suggestion earlier, that they built a common knowledge of each other's philosophies and practices, to the point where they were expert enough to discuss it in a separate group.
Well, I've done many things together with Klal over the years, and like I literally grew up with them and within that sort of movement as it was emerging, and it is creating a new kind of language and a border crossing. It's the anti-city approach. It's not bring everybody to the same place. It says, hey, if you go out a little bit beyond the borders of your city, you might learn you might find that there's people in those other cities who you share more in common with than the people in your own city. Like, I have discovered that I have more in common with some Orthodox and some Reform rabbis than I do with many of my own conservative colleagues. And it turns out people in every movement, that's true, right? Like, being within the parameters of something can impose a kind of groupthink and a lack of creativity and individual thought. And individual thought is good. That guy over there in the Orthodox world, he's having individual thought and I'm having it, and our thoughts are outside of both of our cities. And we only knew that because we were willing to walk outside the walls, learn a little bit from the other guy, and recognize I don't have the whole truth. In order for the truth to emerge, I have to find others because I only have a portion of it. You don't have it either, by the way. You don't have the whole truth either. You only have a portion. But I cannot claim to have the whole thing. Cannot. That's Pharaoh's claim. That's Rosho Bashamayim. That's let's build a tower up. That's vertical ascent. And that's Yertle the turtle. Yeah.
See.
Mm-hmm. You get a little Shifra, a little Pua, and a little Yertle the turtle. Okay. Thank you all. This was great. Really great. Really great. I hope you continue to enjoy this. The next chapter is chapter 3. She calls it Mysterious Priests and Troubled Patriarchs. And it's the story of two non-Jewish encounters, one that Abraham has with Melchizedek, and one that Moshe has with Jethro. How her claim is going to be that their advice to these people, their guidance and their role that they play in these stories creates two different kinds of leaders, that Abraham and Moses are two different kinds of leaders, and that Moses's leadership in some ways redeems Abraham's.
Interesting. Okay,
It's good stuff.
great.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
See you next week.
Great
Thank
to
you.
see you all.
It was great.